It is a great honor to have three religious leaders, people who see social injustice as a spiritual issue, people who see a world built on harmony as a spiritual opportunity. Here at Teachers College, we're dedicated foremost to service. And I can think of no better way to enter into a life of service than with a spiritual lead foot. And so I welcome you with great respect and appreciation. We're going to do about 10 minutes each for honored guest speaker and then open it up for a rich discussion among all you wonderful people in the room. Welcome. Rabbi?
Well, I'm about to share aspects of from an upcoming book called Sacred Testimony. And I tell it the way a rabbi would tell it. And so bear with me as I couch many of my expressions in words of faith. Though we are as a delicate flower in the field, we shall endure forever in the Spirit of God. Without the wellspring of faith, none of us first responders and the people in the town could have delivered a measure of comfort to the poor families that lost their loved ones on that fateful day in Newtown. But not only that, it's your prayers, your letters, your cards, your sweet gifts that came in a torrent for months and continue to trickle in even to this day. Many of you have bore your souls to us in little cards, sharing losses and hope for the future. I chose the quiet life in Connecticut of a small family synagogue, not like on Tim Keller's church. And I was perfectly happy with this kind of a life. I love to hike. I have a strong circle of friends that I continue to cherish. I have my activities. I love music. I have a little Pro Tools studio in my home. And that was it. As they say in Yiddish, everything was fine. And but then that horrible day came, and then everything was put in front of me. All the issues of the country: mental health, guns, gun reform, gun rights, violent culture, violent video games, inner city gangs, drug abuse, war on drugs, stop and frisk, the criminal justice system, the American family, the homicide, suicide, spirituality, law enforcement, the militia movement, and you name it. It's being spoken about with great passion in Connecticut, in Newtown, Connecticut today. Before there was a Newtown phenomenon, there was a loving world that came to our aid in our hour of terror. This love is where the Spirit of God lives. The love in people's hearts shine out to every part of this globe. Love is the great hope for mankind. We can't choose to love and hate. We can choose to love or hate. Your heart cannot toggle between those two polarities. You've got to make a decision in your life. And all the different emotions, resentment, anger, jealousy, that comes out of hate. Whereas admiration, they all have their common parallel meanings. Jealousy on the hate side of the equation is countered by admiration on the other side. So you can comb your jealousy into admiration, okay? You could comb your hatred into determination. And that is the decision that we have every day to make, and we have to keep making it. It's not enough to sort of just push that button one time. You have to, and that's why we pray every day. It's to renew these basic affirmations of our heart and soul. It's not good for man, Adam, to be alone. That's what's written in Genesis. The loner child coming through the school, unreachable, introverted, a child that hardly says a word to anyone month after month, year after year. And this Adam, that we knew was a very thin man, young man, and he would actually move sideways through the hallways against the wall so that you might not even see him. You know, just that's how much he wanted to be a loner. He wouldn't walk this way, he would walk like a little slice coming through the hall against the wall so you wouldn't see him at all. But what should educators do with a child like this? Should we engage them in conversation? It seems like intruding upon his personal world, his personal space, his body language is saying, I don't want to talk with you, I don't want to engage with you. What do you do with the loner, a person like that, in the university, in the high school, in the grade school? So I believe our civilization has it right where we say it is a good thing to greet your neighbor. You know, in Hebrew we say shalom, you know, and that's important stuff, you know, kind of get other things out of the way. Let's start with shalom. Let's start with, you know, salam. Let's start with, you know, peace. And so it is acceptable to greet a person. And in the tender language of the Talmud, when we speak about human interactions, we call our neighbor our friend, even the friend that we have civil disputes with. We still call them our friend. And so when our friend is messaging that they don't want to have anything to do with us, what do we do? So I say, don't stand on ceremony. Okay, they don't want to talk, but you can talk to them. You could tell them a few things. You could try to gain some eye contact with them, and when you do, make sure that you transmit love, respect, and recognition when you look at a person. Very powerful, very good. You could ask them how they are, how they're feeling today, if there's anything you could do for them. They might not respond, but they heard you, and they now know that they sort of exist. Somebody spoke to them. That's really important. I believe that well, first of all, most spree shooters are introverted, but there's very few people that are spree shooters. It's a very rare thing to do. But they've all felt in some way lost and not recognized, and wonder if they maybe truly exist in this society. And when a person remains invisible for so long, eventually they find negative ways to become visible, and negative attention. And so that's why the drawing out the person, not necessarily getting a response right away, I think is crucial. I'll give you an example of two schools in the same dangerous neighborhood. And I'm going to kind of wrap up with that to leave room for everything. Two schools in the same dangerous neighborhood, but one has no or very little violence, and one has quite a bit of violence. And what's the difference? So in the school with little violence, the principal stands in front of the school at the entrance, and they're all the same, apples to apples as far as the provisions of security. But in this particular school, the principal stands there and he says, "Good morning, Jimmy. How is your new dog? Sally, how is your grandmother doing? Good morning, James. Oh, you got a lot of books there today." Little talk to the people, which is powerful because it helps them know that they're part of the group, and they're there and they're recognized, and that is so crucial. And it also makes for better academic performance when a person feels connected with the group. We are very intelligent mammals, and if you look at the mammal world, wild dogs just sort of, they turn into a little, big ball of fur. They all sort of commingle with each other, and look at many different mammals, and we are meant to be together. It is not good for man, for Adam, to be alone. And we must seek out the loner, even if they don't seem to really want to engage. They got the message. they heard you and they were recognized. Very crucial, probably more important, and will increase safety and security. These methods, more than any kind of physical gun or sally port or any other kind of video camera, that one could employ. Because in the end, if a person is connected, I just end with, I also do chaplaincy work for the state of Connecticut, and I'm around killers all the time. And I'll just end with this, that one gentleman, and I'm trained in behavioral management, so I know how to kill people. And so this one gentleman pulls my hand when I'm shaking his hand quite forcefully to his chest. Could be defined as an assault of an officer. And so I thought about all the different things I could do to him, if I had to. And but then I remembered that that's the last resort, okay? And that the main 99% of the problems that you're going to be able to handle in this life are through your interpersonal communication skills. Remember the case with the lady in Georgia with the person that wanted to shoot up the whole school? If you haven't heard that, it's textbook, perfect interpersonal skill. She just nailed it, perfect. So in any case, what did I do? So I thought, okay, I'm a rabbi, so my product is what? My product is God. So he's pulling I reframed it, and he's pulling my hand to his heart because he wants God in his heart, right? He wants spirituality. So I take it to him, and I say, oh, you have a very good heart, my friend. He looks at me, and he goes, Rabbi, we cool.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller, for inviting me here. So I'd like to just introduce my outfit a little bit before I introduce myself. I think it kind of helps us clear maybe some obstacles that you might have. So I am a Hindu monk. I've been a Hindu monk for about 14 years. And as monks in many traditions, not all traditions, but in many traditions, we have a shaved head, and that's why I have a shaved head. Basically, a shaved head is a sign of renunciation. Here is something we can become really overly obsessed with. This is one way for us to leave out one obsession, one of many. And then there's a mark on my forehead, and the mark is going up, actually represents the footprint of God, which means that we're placing God's feet on our head, so that we're humbling ourselves before God. And then I'm wearing orange robes, and some Hindu monks wear orange robes, and some of them wear white robes. And some Hindu monks also just wear their hair all the way out, never cut it. The yogis that live in the caves. So I'm not living in a cave, so I'm keeping my head shaved. But the robes are also a sign of simplicity. In one sense, I never have to worry about what's matching with what's not matching. Everything matches with everything that I have. Keeps life simple. It doesn't take me long to figure out what I'm going to wear every morning. So just a little bit about my attire as a Hindu monk. And sometimes you'll see me wearing just regular Western clothes, and I like to think when I'm doing that I'm actually going undercover. So that, sometimes when people see me without my regular robes, they're wondering, hey, oh my gosh, you're wearing pants. I'm like, yeah, I like to wear pants too. So anyways, what I would like to address is the importance and impact of living one's faith. And I think that there are two important components that come out of living one's faith and practicing one's faith. Ultimately, I think whatever faith we're practicing, one important that should come out of that is an improved character. And I think that this is true, I think, for all traditions, that if we're really practicing our faith and trying to develop love of God, which is what I believe most faiths promote or encourage, then we have to be developing an improved character. And what that means, according to at least the Bhagavad Gita, which is translated as the Song of God, which is one of the main spiritual texts of India, that an individual who is becoming more spiritually advanced is becoming more humble. And of course, in this modern society, humility almost sounds like weakness. but it's just the opposite. It's explained that without humility, spiritual knowledge actually cannot be revealed to us. We can study the text as much as we want, but without proper development of character, that humility, that we actually won't get it. The text will not reveal itself to us. The practice will not really penetrate if we're not trying. Of course, the practice should also be making us humble, but we have to really try to do that, to develop that character. Simultaneously, as we're trying to develop humility, the Bhagavad Gita, another Hindu text, explain that we also need to become more tolerant. Something very much needed in the world today. We're finding so many reasons to not be tolerant of each other. We're disagreeing, we're fighting over every kind of superficial thing we can imagine. Skin color, gender, religion, all of these things. And so the result of practicing one's faith is that we're becoming more tolerant. At least we're trying to become more tolerant. Our own spiritual traditions. And the best way to analyze if we're making spiritual advancement is just to take inventory. Am I any more humble? Am I any more tolerant? And of course, the really big one, am I any more forgiving now than I was 5 years ago? If not, something is not being done correctly. So that is a simple and easy way to analyze. These are very complicated things, these qualities, humility and tolerance and forgiveness. And Hinduism says that it can take multiple lifetimes actually to develop these qualities. And in the Bhagavad Gita it says that a learned person, a wise person should be able to see a priest, an educator, an animal, a less fortunate person with equal vision. So basically what it's saying is not discriminating based on the externals, but seeing the soul inside of every living being. And that is again, like I said, a lot of our conflicts, most of our conflicts in this world are because we're identifying with our bodies and identifying other people's bodies and seeing, okay, this body is different than mine. Mine must be better than theirs somehow or other. And then we spend so much time figuring out how I am and my body's skills and abilities are better than someone else's. We could be using our energy in so many different ways, in so many better ways, I think. So, and not only are we trying to see with equal vision all other people, but Hinduism is also a big promoter of seeing with equal vision humans, but also animals. Showing the same kind of respect that we do to each other, trying to show it to the animals. Because under that equal vision principle, we are all on this planet children of God, including the four-legged and the winged and the gilled, all of them. And so it suggests that we truly try to see every living thing and give equal respect to all living beings that either fly in the earth or walk on the earth or swim in our oceans. And if we can try to do that, and if we can try to develop love for all, of course, easier said than done. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But our tradition should be moving in that direction. Should be moving us in that direction, I feel. Another important component is also seeing the earth as our mother. So when we deal with the planet Earth, how is our planet, how is our mother that's given us life and is giving us so much nourishment every single day? How are we treating her? So being conscious of the environment, another very key component. And one thing that spiritual traditions have difficulty with is getting along with one another and respecting one another. And of course that's unfortunate because it hurts a lot of people's faith. And I think an important component of practicing one's own faith is that we're able to not just tolerate, because tolerate is not a good word, If I tell you I'm tolerating you, you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll just leave the room so you don't have to tolerate me. You don't have to, expend that much energy to tolerate me. But to respect another person's tradition, see it as a path that's going to lead that person to the same God that I worship. Their prayers may be in a different language. They may sing and dance to a different rhythm and beat. They may have, you may play a piano and organ, I'm playing a harmonium or a drum or a tabla. But why shouldn't God appreciate all of these types of instruments and songs in all these different languages? And also I think, especially as people of faith, I think it's important that we also learn to respect people of no faith. People who just don't believe in the higher being or unsure. I think the overall idea of just disrespecting others, we need to kind of bring that to an end. Because ultimately, if a person is of no faith, then that's a choice that they've made for whatever reason. So it's this, this is what ultimately we all, as people of faith or no faith, I think we're able to show that kind of respect to every living being, whatever skin color, whatever religion, whatever gender, whatever faith or no faith, whatever species. If we're able to come to that platform, then I think then we can see that, yes, this person is practicing their faith. And the benefit, I think other people will actually gain inspiration from that. Because right now, a lot of times, the religious people that uninspire others from practicing, because okay, you're a person of God, but look at how you're behaving with each other and everyone else. So I think that's another impact, strong impact, is just the way we behave and act will impact and inspire others to go deeper into their own spiritual traditions. So I think my time is up.
I'm intrigued by the way my colleague speakers have drawn on the resources of their particular faith to talk about how we can bring about a more just and loving world. So what I'm going to do is I'm a Christian minister, and I'd like to talk to you about the resources Christianity gives you for those things. I would never say, and nobody else here has said this either, that there aren't resources for being compassionate and active toward a just society that non-religious people, for example, can have. There's all sorts of resources, all sorts of motivations. But because I'm an expert in my own faith tradition, I'm just going to show you what the resources there are in Christianity, and they may be resources you haven't thought of, okay? Just as a quick example, when I was a brand new minister, I'm from up here, I'm from Pennsylvania, the Northeast. In 1975, I took a small church in a small town in Virginia, and realized I was a Yankee, I was college educated, nobody in my church was. I was kind of scared and careful about what I said when I first went there in 1975, but I remember about 6 months after I'd been there and I'd been preaching and teaching the Bible, one of my older members, he wasn't that old, he was in his 50s, but he was one of our longtime members of the church, came to me and said, under your preaching, I've come to realize that I've been a racist all my life. Okay, now, as a 24-year-old Yankee young guy doesn't want to, I was too cowardly to talk about that. After 6 months, I hadn't gotten there. I hadn't said a thing about that. But he just put two and two together, and as he came to understand the basic core message of Christianity, which is all I was working on at the time, he immediately connected the dots and decided, I'm a racist. Interesting. I hadn't gotten to those passages. There's plenty of ways you can talk about why the Bible says racism is wrong, but I hadn't gotten there. He just put it together. Why? All right. Well, let me give you an idea. In the New Testament, the New Testament talks about the idea that salvation, connection to God, doesn't come through our efforts, doesn't come through trying to make ourselves virtuous. It doesn't come through trying to be a better person. The salvation that you receive does make you a better person. This is the Christian view. But it doesn't come because you have made yourself a good person. It's called salvation by grace, not by our good works. Okay. However, what's interesting is the book of James has a very interesting passage, and 1 John, these are New Testament books. They both say something extremely interesting about what a person who has been saved by God's grace, not because of anything that he or she has done, but only because of what Jesus has done for them. That's the core. The core message is Jesus, because he went to the cross and died, he's achieved salvation, and we receive that, not because we deserve it, but just because we ask for it as undeserving sinners. That's the core message. And what's interesting is James 2 and 1 John 3, listen carefully. James 2 says, if you have faith, but you have no deeds, can that kind of faith save you? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and if one of you says to them, go, be warm and be well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Now here's what it's trying to say. If I believe I've been saved by what Jesus Christ has done, not because of my good works, that's just a salvation, but that doesn't turn me into a social activist. In other words, if I say, well, I believe in Jesus and I believe he saved me not because of my good deeds, but just because of it's an act of grace, and that doesn't turn you into someone who cares about the poor or the needy, doesn't care about injustice, doesn't care about people who don't have their needs met. If you don't care, then he says, you really weren't saved by faith. That's an amazingly strong statement. It's astounding. It's really saying, you think you're a Christian, but if you don't really care about justice and the poor, you need to go back and see whether you really believed. It's astounding. 1 John 3 says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, so we should lay down our lives for others. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech only, but with actions and in truth. It's an amazing statement. And I remember when I first came to grips with these statements, I remember thinking, well, first of all, we all know people who say I'm born again and I'm a Christian and I've been saved by the blood of Jesus, and they don't care a bit about justice, and they don't care a bit about, they're not very compassionate, they don't see their own racism, right? I would say those are not, all I would say is those are people, according to the New Testament, haven't really thought out the implications of what they believe. I'm not saying they're not Christians, I wouldn't say that. All I would say is they're not being true to their own beliefs. Why? Well, here's in brief. If my identity, put it this way, if you have an identity based on relative status, that is to say, if you believe you're a pretty good person, why? Because you work hard? If your identity is based on the idea that I'm a hard worker, if that's how you kind of think of yourself as, I'm a good person because I'm a hard worker, then you have to look down your nose at people who are what you think of as lazy. Or if you say, I'm a smart person, you have to look down your nose to some degree at people who you think are dumb. Or if you say, I'm a moral person, God loves me and I'm a good person, or you may not be religious when you say, I'm a good person, that's how I know that I'm a valuable person. Well, then you have to look askance, you have to feel superior to people who you don't think have your values. If you say, well, what's really important about me is I have an open mind, well, then you have to feel superior to people who you think have a closed mind. Got it? If your identity is based on relative status because you have achieved it, because of some factor that you've identified as crucial to your self-image, you have to feel superior to other people. But if your self-image is not achieved but received, if it's a gift, this is the idea behind Christianity. If you say, I have really received my salvation from God, he loves me, not because I'm worthy of it, but because it's a gift, because of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross. That's the core of the Christian message. That humbles you. It just humbles you, exactly what some of my friends up here have been talking about. It humbles you and softens you. It has to, because my self-image is not based on being a better man or a better woman or a better husband or a better wife or something. It's based on I'm just a sinner saved by grace. Therefore, when I meet other people, I'm not assuming, or I don't need to feel better than them in any way. And an awful lot of racism comes from the insecurity that makes us feel like I've got to feel like I'm from a better race, a better community, a better class of people. And my friend in that little town in Virginia had put those dots together. And I remember him telling me, and I'm ending here just to show you how important this is. I remember him saying, well, I realized that, here's a guy who actually hadn't finished junior high school. I mean, he had about, I think if I remember correctly, he had about a 7th grade education. He was a white man in his 50s. He couldn't really read or write. And he said to me, I realized that I had to look down at the black people in my town as a way of feeling like, well, I'm not at the very bottom. But when I realized how much God loves me in Jesus Christ, I said, I don't need to feel that way about people anymore. See, he put it together himself. So anyway, when we started our church years ago, one of the very first things that I saw happen was the same dynamic, that when people, even before I started to hammer people about, if we're a Christian, we have to care about intolerance, we have to care about injustice, we have to care about poverty, we have to care about needs. As soon as I did that, I didn't do that. I just started talking about the core, and a lot of people said, well, wait a minute, then we've got to change the way in which we treat our neighbors. And so there are great resources in Christianity. It's not the only resources for a loving world, but I just want you to know there's strong resources there too.
Thank you. Thank you for very wise, very loving, very illuminating, generous teachings. Should we start with questions, thoughts? Yes.
As Reverend Keller had said, there are secular resources also, and I'm aware of those, and also from my own tradition, what the resources are. But what would your answer be to somebody who's seeking paths and asking, what is the difference between compassion, love, empathy, kindness, social activism when you believe in a deity or you don't believe in a deity? So what would you say may be missing from the agnostic or the atheist pursuits of seeking a better world?
Could we get all three of you on that? That's a big, beautiful question.
I think maybe I'm not sure who's older, the Hindus or the Jews.
It's arguable.
Give me a little more time to think. Can you ask me that question one more time? Maybe you can condense it in some way.
I was just going to offer that, yeah. Sometimes I go on. Since we can have ethical systems with or without a deity, people can bring goodness to the world with or without believing in a deity, what would you say may be missing from not believing in a deity when you're looking to improve your character and make the world a better place? Or as my son would put it, when we were touring colleges and I tried to get him to go into the Hillel Center with me, he said, no thanks. And his answer was, I don't need to believe in a deity to justify an ethical system.
Well, first of all, I think it's definitely possible to be a good person, whether you believe in God or not. I know many of them. For myself, I've just had very powerful experiences of reciprocation with a deity, that are, it's just an experience. It's like almost with a person. Through prayer, I've experienced reciprocation with a deity through the way I've been protected in the world for crazy things that have happened in my life. I've felt the presence of a deity. I mean, I've been praying to a deity for the last 35 years or so. And I just, for myself, can't imagine not having someone there. It's like, when you offer a prayer or you meditate, I feel like the deity, there's someone at the other end. The call gets answered. The call is answered, and it's definitely it's a tough question to answer. But I think for me, like I said, it's that item of experience. I've had very real experiences, very powerful experiences of reciprocating with a divine being through my prayers. I feel like I get the inspiration to do what I do in life, to teach others and to guide others from that deity. That's where I get my inspiration from. If that deity wasn't there, I don't know if I would be doing what I'm doing. That's how it is.
The short answer is nothing, and the longer answer is that the great thesis of the Dalai Lama, who I heard deliver this in Danbury, really speaks to your point beautifully, that the fruits of religion is compassion, kindness, forbearance, patience, and those are what religion must deliver us to if it's any good at all. And so if a person is able to get there through ethical culture, and my father's here, he's an atheist, but I won the bet. I won the bet with the New York Mets in 1969, and I said if the Mets win the World Series when they were in last place, we could believe there's a God in the world. So please do miracles for the Mets. Please do miracles. And but if you come to kindness and compassion, there's no difference. It doesn't matter how you got there. You're on the mountaintop. You're there.
I would say to your son that he's only half right. I would push back halfway. Here's why. When he says, "I don't need to believe in God to have an ethical system," you need to say it's half right. You don't need to believe in God to have moral feelings, to feel strongly that this is right and this is wrong. But you probably need a God to have moral obligation. That is to say to somebody else, in spite of your feelings, what you're doing is wrong. See, if there's no God and this world is all there is, if none of us are right about spiritual, there is no spiritual, it's just material, then everybody got here through the strong eating the weak. It's just we got here through the survival of the fittest. And to suddenly say the way everything in nature, everything that's natural is not right, there's no way to get a standard to say something is wrong in nature unless it's a supernatural standard. Or if you want to get real practical, it's like this. If you say to somebody, my feeling is that gender discrimination is wrong. And so let's just say here's some tribal chieftain in Africa who says, well, our culture says that there's really nothing wrong with keeping women excluded from power. And you say, well, you're wrong. And he says, oh, why? Well, because all of us smart people at Columbia University know you're wrong. He said, that's the worst kind of cultural imperialism there is. He says, you have feelings and I got feelings, and my feelings, if there is no God, all morality, all moral statements are person-specific or culturally constructed. And you've got no right to tell somebody that you think is doing injustice that they need to stop. If there is a God, or if, in other words, frankly, if Christianity or Hinduism or Judaism are right or partly right, then you got a basis for basically making moral claims. Not just moral feelings, what I want to do, but moral claims to somebody else that you need to stop doing what you're doing. And I don't know how you work for injustice without telling some people they need to stop doing what they're doing. So I'd say he's half right. But I'd push back. I would say there are resources in the religious tradition that you would need in order to really work for a just and loving society without being kind of disingenuous and self-contradictory. Because you don't want to be in a position where you're telling people something that you don't have the basis in your own belief system to really follow through on. Anyway, there's some ideas.
Thank you all. I have a question. What say you, and I put it broadly in this way, what say you of suffering brought to good people?
So the youngest religion goes first, is that
I want to be fair.
it? Yeah. Charles Taylor wrote a book a few years ago called A Secular Age. It's unreadable, and that's why everybody says it's one of the great books that have been written in the last 20 years, called A Secular Age, but nobody can read it. But anyway, Charles Taylor, A Secular Age, makes a point in there, I have read this part of it, where he said there was a humility years ago. He said around 500 years ago it changed, but regardless of who you were, whether you were Hindu or Jewish or Christian or Buddhist or animist or whatever, there was a certain humility, there was a sense of which the world is bigger than we can understand. And if there is a God, and everybody believed in some kind of God, that God wouldn't be someone that we would be able to completely comprehend, and that God would have to have reasons for allowing some things that we can't fathom. When I was 45 years old and my children were like 4 or 5, sometimes they come to me and say, "Dad, why do we have to move from Philadelphia to New York City? You know, this is the worst thing you've ever done to me." And I would say, you know, from your standpoint, I know it looks like I'm ruining your life, but I can't really explain it to you that, you know, because I'm 45 and you're 4, you know, and I just can't get. So there used to be, Charles Taylor said there used to be more of a humility. Some people think this is a weak answer, but I don't think so. He says there used to be more of a humility of saying, well, if there is a God, of course he'd have to have some reasons for allowing things that I wouldn't know. I'd have to allow him for some mystery. If he's big enough for me to be mad at for not stopping suffering, then he's big enough for me to have some reason, big enough to have reasons that I wouldn't be able to fathom. And so Taylor says that the people who say, because I can't understand why God would allow suffering, I won't believe in God, that's a very modern viewpoint, and it's and you have already, in a sense, the cards are already sort of stacked against God amongst modern people, because modern people feel like, I should be able to understand this, and if God can't give me reasons, then I'm not going to believe in him. So I guess my first response would be humility. I don't know why God allows the bad things to happen. I sure know he does. And I don't think that disproves the existence of God. It does prove that he's bigger than me. So that's one response.
All right. Well, this is a big question, and so when man ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, mankind gained free will, and you can't have it both ways. If you have free will, then you have that responsibility. So, if 30,000 or 32,000 people are dying from gun violence every year, let's just take that as an example, right? In this country. And are we helpless? Can we do anything about it? Sure we can. We can do lots of things about it. And so if we don't do something about it, is it God's fault? Since we have the ability to do it ourselves, God gave us the ability. You know, it's like the person that says if God wanted us to fly, he would have given us wings. Well, God did give us wings. God gave us the intelligence to look at the birds and build wings. And so once we have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, now we have free will. Hashemayim lahashem v'ha'aretz natan livnei adam. The heavens were given, remain with God, the spiritual world, but the earth was given to mankind, and we have to be stewards of the earth. We were told that we were stewards of the earth, and we had to subdue the earth and take control of things. So with that power and that right comes a lot of responsibilities.
I asked myself the same question in 1993 when my parents lost their very, very lucrative jewelry business in Los Angeles, and we ended up losing all our property, all our money, everything that we owned. And when we found ourselves living in East Europe, post-communist Bulgaria. Went from $1 million house to a 1-bedroom apartment in Bulgaria. At that time, I was asking myself the same question, and I was kind of angry because I went from complete certainty in my life to complete uncertainty. And then I was blaming my parents for maybe making some wrong decisions. And then I started blaming God. And then I started to read the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita suggested, don't point the finger anywhere else, just turn it right back around and look at your own self. And I thought, well, yeah, those are the choices that I have. I can blame people, I can blame God, or I can just look into my own life and see, because within Hinduism we understand we have multiple lives. And it's a journey. It's a journey. This is one station, this is one stop on the subway train. And the understanding is that whatever is happening to me in my life right now, somehow in the past, I did something. Somehow, I can't remember my previous life, but that somehow contributed to what's happening to me now. Otherwise, it's either, the other option is God is cruel, there is no God, and it's an irrational world where things are happening by random chance. And I didn't like the idea that God could be cruel, because that's scary. You got somebody that powerful and it's cruel, and or that the world is just irrational and random chance. That sounds even crazier. Okay, so maybe, and then I started to look within, and I looked at my own tendencies, at my own envy and greed and pride in my heart. I said, yeah, if in my previous life, why not? Maybe I did do some stuff to hurt people. Maybe I did help, ruin other people's lives in some ways. And now it's coming back to me. So I have a choice. Either I can blame, or I can accept my karma and try to become a better person now so that I don't cause harm to others through my actions or through my speech or in any way, shape, or form, and just try to become a better person, more compassionate person, and try to really care for others. Because not only does that set up a better future for me, but that's ultimately what, God wants of me. And then, but also at the same time to be careful that when we do see others suffering, that the number one principle isn't karma, but it's compassion. That we have to help other people. Whatever they're suffering, that's not our concern. We should help in what, the idea isn't to say, oh, okay, it's your karma. It may or may not be whatever it is, that's not my problem. As a human being, I should just reach out and try to help.
Please.
I know we want to interact a little bit. Let me just say one thing. I'll promise, Lisa, it'll be really short. First, two things. Number one, Hinduism always has. I've always thought Hinduism had a much neater answer to the question of why does God let good things happen, bad things happen to good people? It has always had a neater answer, and you just heard it. It's much more airtight than what Jews and Christians can give you, or secular people. And that is, there is no such thing as undeserved suffering. Somewhere you did it in the past, and now it's happening to you, and now you need to learn from it and do better. And so there's no undeserved suffering. Now, the only reason I point out, why in the world as a Christian would I point out that the Hindu has a better airtight answer for that? The answer is, in spite of the fact that it's fair to say that all religions have some similar resources for love and action in the world. We've talked about it. This world is not all there is. The materialism is not all there is. There's basis for tolerance, compassion, etc. Nevertheless, I don't want anyone to say, oh, all religions are the same. They aren't actually. They actually have unique strengths and weaknesses. They have unique resources, and I don't think you should be lazy like a lot of younger people are today, which is to say, I don't have to think about this stuff. Religion is just good, it's all right, fine, and, maybe someday I'll be religious. You really ought to think about it. See, if I had more time, and I won't take it, I could push back a bit and say, well, here's what Christianity has that Jews and Hindus don't have, but I'm not going to do that. I'm only trying to make this one case. Don't be lazy. As great as all the different faiths are, in some ways, as similar as they are, they're also different. That's all. So don't be lazy, think it out. I've always liked that answer. I wish I could give it, I just don't believe it. But I've always said, man, if I was pastoring somebody who was suffering, I wish I could give that answer, because I always thought it was the most airtight of all the religious answers.
Yes.
Reverend Tim,
Yes.
I think you said that believers or non-believers can be passionate, caring people. Didn't matter whether
Right.
you're a believer or not. But you said the believer has a responsibility or an obligation. I think you used the word obligation because he or she believes in God.
Yeah.
The word obligation is something like that word tolerance. You know, does it come from the heart? I don't think so. Does it come from love? I don't think so.
Well, okay, it's fair. I mean, I use the word obligation two ways. One is, if there's a God, and God says, all people are made in my image. They all are infinitely precious. They all are of infinite value. Then I have if there is a God like that, I have an obligation to treat all people with fairness. If there is no God, and we just got here, if there's no God and we got here strictly through natural selection, the strong eating the weak, then I don't see how you've got any obligation. You may have a feeling. You may say, I want to treat all people as, all people as equal and as valuable. But where would the obligation come from? You may feel it inside, yes, but that's just a feeling. And if your feeling changes, then you don't have the obligation. I would say if it's only a feeling. I took a marriage vow because I knew that sometimes I wouldn't feel like loving my wife. I wanted to have an obligation on top of me all the time, so I didn't just go by my feelings. And it has strengthened my feelings, by the way, to have that obligation there. So that's what I meant by that. That's all.
We only have a few minutes, and I'd really love everyone to hear from you each a brief story of when great brokenness has come to you and you've been part of walking your spiritual community into wholeness. We're talking 9/11, we're talking Newtown.
Can't hear you.
Walking your
Can't
spiritual.
hear you, dear.
Thank you. I'd ask each of our very, very distinguished religious leaders if they might share a brief story of a time that their spiritual community has come to them in brokenness and they were part of, through their spiritual path, creating wholeness and more.
I'm going to take that question and turn it on its head because that's what we do in the Talmud, in Judaism. There I was. I wanted to be a violinist. I practiced all summer. The A minor piece by Vivaldi. And I was in front of Yehudi Weiner at SUNY at Purchase trying to change tracks to get into the music school. I guess I didn't play it fast enough, and I failed the audition. I had a crisis. I felt that I had prayed the whole summer, and God was very good to me in 1969, but I hadn't seen him since. And I prayed the whole summer, and this time it didn't work. And so I said, God, unless you show me a sign that you really exist, then you and I are finished. I am not going to offer up any more prayers. I was 19 years old. And that's it. And so at SUNY at Purchase, the university is sort of at in a horseshoe shape. And we hitchhike outside. We take rides into the city from people that we know from the university. But nobody was picking me up. And so I was towards the main street, and a milk truck comes sort of rattling down the road. And I figured, usually the mass killers are not milkmen, So I guess it's going to be okay. I'll take the ride. And so he says, I'll take you into the city, but I have one last delivery to make first. And I said, fine. So 7 minutes after this prayer was made, I was standing inside the yeshiva of Mount Kisco. So that made me feel very, very scared that maybe there really is a God, and I'm kind of sorry the way I talked to you about that.
So this is somewhat of a recent thing that happened about 2.5, 3 years ago. And so I live in the Lower East Side, actually. That's where our monastery is located, not in the hills of India or anything like that. Well, the good thing it's a village. It's the East Village, so that's nice. It's a really kind of pure and positive and wholesome environment, as most villages are. But this happened about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when a very senior monk from our tradition, he was 52, and he left the order. And nobody expected that to happen. And he decided to get married. But the thing is, didn't tell a lot of people that that's what was happening. So when it happened, the community was shocked. And the community hasn't been the same since then, because a lot of people kind of lost faith or got disturbed or began criticizing, what he did. And so for myself and dealing with some of the others in our community, I was trying to look at, not always successfully, but I was trying to look at all the amazing things he had done for that community. And I was trying to remind myself and everyone else there that actually none of us would be here if he hadn't done in the past all the work that he had done. He started the monastery in Manhattan. He kind of kept it going for the last 12 years, gave us a place to come and worship and form a community, to go deeper into our own faith. So now, God has sent us a test. And this is a test of how well we practiced and studied in the past. So why not just remember the wonderful work that he's done to help us all, and not so much worry about that he left in not the best possible way. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Lisa mentioned 9/11, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, I do know in times of crisis in a town or a city, there's no doubt that the faith communities you go into overdrive, but you do an awful lot of service. So very often the faith communities can be kind of ignored by the rest of the town or the city. I'm sure the rabbi discovered this. In a time of crisis, you really become like a hospital. And tremendous number of people go in and out of your doors who aren't necessarily your people, but still get help. Just quickly to let you know, in 9/11 here, I remember right after 9/11, I didn't know what to expect the Sunday after 9/11, but I do remember my son called me up, my teenage son, and said, he talked to me and said, one of my friends who I go to school with here in the city, who's never gone to church in his entire life, called me and said, do I remember right, is your father a pastor? And he said, yeah. So do you go to church? Yeah. I said, I want to go to church with you on Sunday. And my son said, he asked his friend why. He says, I just feel a need for connection. So we had an extra 2,500 people show up to church that day. About 15 minutes before the service was started, there were so many people lined up that I went up to my musicians and we called an audible, we might say. I made this huge announcement. I said, anybody, just pass this back. If you come back in an hour and a half, we'll do another service. And 1,000 people showed up after. Now, what happened over the next few weeks was not only that every single time you had a service of any kind, there were people showing up, just saying, I need connection, I need counsel. And we were just like dozens of people that would just hang out after the services, and those of us who were pastors and all that just spent time talking with them. But here was the most interesting thing, you'd find this interesting how faith communities can work. And we're a Presbyterian church, okay, so $2 million, without being asked, $2 million got sent to us from Presbyterian churches around the country. We didn't even ask for it. It just started coming in the mail saying, help people there, we're all so upset about what's going on. It just came to us. We realized it was a little bit of an institutional crisis for us because we realized that kind of money, you've got to really, really, really be you've got to do your due diligence here. We got to really be careful how we use this money. We got to make sure that everything is accounted for. We've got to have accounting. So we, and small businesses, mainly relatively poor people working for those businesses. You know, a lot of them were not, were not U.S. citizens and that sort of thing, and they were just without anything. And we just let it known on the street, if you have lost your job because of 9/11, come talk to us. Just show us some certification of it. Show us something, you know, a W-2 form, a receipt, anything, and we'll help you. And actually, we went into triage mode. We got about 60 people in the church. Many we had some MSWs who were in the church, and we trained people. And we just every single spot in our little offices every day for weeks was filled with people who just heard about it and came in. If they could prove, which wasn't that hard, that they lost their job, we helped them. And if they couldn't prove it, we decided we gave them like a 2-week. If they couldn't prove it, because we were trying to really be good stewards of that money. What we did was we gave them a Metro card that worked for I forget what it was. You know, it was like a kind of an unlimited Metro card for a week or something like that, just so they could get around looking for work. And we kept records of every single penny, but a lot of people were really touched, helped. It was an astounding time. And our church actually, there's lots and lots of people in our church right now who never thought they'd be going to church, but showed up the Sunday after or the Sundays after, and they said they're here. So it was a remarkable time. It was a tragic time. We all got burnt out. For the next 2 years, everybody was depressed because of overwork. It wasn't an easy thing, but it was. I look back on the thing, and I know a lot of other churches went through the same kind of situation, and synagogues and other religious institutions. So it was a remarkable time, and shows what the resource is for the community, the faith community can be.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I want to say for everyone in this room, we have such gratitude for the work you do. Thank you very much.